Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into George Orwell's 1984. You've all sent in some really interesting excerpts. Let's see how they stack up against today's world.
Yeah, 1984, it's considered a masterpiece of dystopian literature, and it really explores totalitarianism, surveillance, the manipulation of truth, things that feel very relevant even today in the 21st century. It's almost like Orwell had a crystal ball.
Right. It really is. It's crazy how a book written over 75 years ago can still feel so relevant today. So what do you think is the first big takeaway, the first big lesson we can get from 1984?
Well, the most obvious one is probably the dangers of totalitarianism. Absolute power. Orwell just drops us into Oceania, and it's ruled by Big Brother and the party, and they control every single part of people's lives, the news you consume, the thoughts you think. It's a very stark warning, a warning about what can happen when power goes unchecked.
Okay, but is that really relevant today? I mean, do we really have a Big Brother watching our every move?
That's the question, isn't it? You have the rise of all these surveillance technologies, the increasing control of information, the concentration of power in the hands of certain, tech giants. It might not be a boot stamping on a human face, forever. But these subtle nudges towards conformity, are they that different?
Yeah, it's a good point. So how do we guard against this creeping totalitarianism? I mean, do we all have to become rebels like Winston?
I don't know if full-blown rebellion is the answer, but I think we can be aware of the subtle ways that power operates, question the narratives that we are being fed, support institutions that hold those in power accountable, and don't be afraid to speak up when you see injustice, because sometimes silence is just another word for consent.
Wow. That is deep.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Orwell he's really pushing us to be more than just passive consumers. He wants us to actively participate in shaping our society.
Right. And that leads us to another crucial lesson from 1984. The manipulation of truth and reality. Remember the Ministry of Truth? That's where they're constantly rewriting history to fit the party's agenda.
Oh, yeah. The whole war is peace, freedom is slavery thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how truth can be so easily twisted. But does that really happen today?
Well, think about the information overload that we all face on a daily basis. Social media algorithms, curated news feeds, deepfakes. It's getting harder and harder to figure out what's fact and what's fiction. Orwell's concept of doublethink, which is, where people are forced to hold two completely contradictory beliefs at the same time, it feels very, very relevant.
So how do we navigate this sea of misinformation? I mean, do we all have to become professional fact checkers?
I don't think it's about becoming an expert in everything, but it's about developing a healthy sense of skepticism. Question the source. Think about the bias. Look for arguments that are based on, actual evidence, and be wary of anyone who claims to have a monopoly on the truth.
So we basically have to become our own Ministry of Truth. Kind of ironic, isn't it?
That is a bit ironic, yeah. But it shows how important critical thinking is, which brings us to another lesson. The importance of individual freedom of thought. The party in 1984 isn't just happy with controlling your actions. They want to control your thoughts, too.
Yeah, the Newspeak thing, right? Limiting language to limit thought. It's scary. But how does that apply to us? Are we being brainwashed by social media?
Well, maybe not directly brainwashed, but think about how these algorithms personalize our online experiences. They create these echo chambers where you're only exposed to information that reinforces what you already believe. It's a very subtle form of thought control. It can make us really resistant to new ideas or different perspectives.
So what's the antidote? I mean, do we have to ditch social media?
Well, a digital detox is never a bad thing, but it's not always realistic. I think the key is to actively seek out diverse viewpoints, challenge your own assumptions, be open to engaging in respectful debate. Intellectual curiosity, it's the enemy of thought control.
Yeah. We have to deprogram ourselves from this constant barrage of targeted content.
Right. Orwell is reminding us that True freedom means thinking for ourselves. It doesn't mean just regurgitating the opinions that we're fed.
It's like he predicted cancel culture.
Maybe he did. Which brings us to another kind of unsettling part of 1984. Those telescreens that are everywhere, watching everyone. It might feel a little too familiar.
Yeah, that's definitely Big Brother. Full disclosure, I'm a bit of a techie, so this one hits a little close to home for me.
Yeah, well, this is lesson 4, everyone, and it's about the dangers of surveillance and the loss of privacy. It might seem a little far-fetched comparing our world to Oceania, But think about the sheer amount of data that's collected about us every single day. Everything from your online activity to your location data to your purchasing habits. It's all being tracked. It's all being analyzed. And it could be used against us.
Yeah, but I mean, companies collect data to like personalize ads and stuff.
Yeah.
But is that really a threat to our freedom?
Well, think about it this way. When our every move is being monitored, do we really feel free to, to express ourselves, to dissent, to just be ourselves? Or do we start to self-censor, knowing that Big Brother or maybe Big Tech is always watching?
So it's not just about creepy ads. It's about the effect that this has on our behavior and maybe even on our thoughts.
Right. And it raises some really important questions about who controls that data, how they're using it, and, what kind of safeguards are in place to protect our privacy.
So what can we do about it? Do we all need to ditch our smartphones? Go off the grid?
I mean, that is an option, but for most of us, it's not exactly realistic. We can be more mindful of our digital footprint, use strong passwords, be careful about what information you're sharing online, and most importantly, support organizations that are fighting for stronger privacy laws, stronger privacy regulations.
It's about taking back control of our data and demanding more transparency from those who are collecting it.
It is. It's about recognizing that privacy isn't just a personal preference. It's a fundamental right that needs to be protected.
And that brings us to another big lesson from 1984. And this one is all about the power of words. Remember Newspeak? The language designed to limit thought by just getting rid of words.
Right, that's lesson 5. And it's about the power of language and the role that words play in shaping our thoughts. It's a pretty chilling reminder that language isn't just a tool for communication, it's also a tool for control.
I feel like he was predicting the politically correct police.
Think about how language is used, to shape public opinion, to demonize people that you disagree with, to create narratives that serve certain agendas. Words have power. And those who control the language, they often control the narrative.
So it's not just about what we say, it's how we say it and who's saying it.
Exactly. We need to be critical consumers of language, paying attention not just to what words mean, but to the underlying message they carry. And we need to be wary of anyone who's trying to control the language in order to control the conversation.
So we basically need to develop like Newspeak detectors. This is heavy stuff.
It is, but it's also empowering. By becoming more aware of the power of language, we can become more discerning, about the information we consume. Yeah. And we can become more effective communicators ourselves.
It's like taking back control of the narrative. But you know what really scares me about 1984? It's how they use fear to control people.
Yeah, that is a major theme throughout the novel.
I mean, it's like he predicted terrorism.
Lesson 6 is all about fear and psychological manipulation. In Oceania, it's the constant threat of being vaporized.
Yeah.
That's what keeps people in line.
Yeah, I mean, that's terrifying. But is that really relevant today? I mean, we don't live under a totalitarian regime, do we?
Well, think about how fear is used in our world. Fear of terrorism, fear of economic collapse, fear of the other. Politicians, advertisers, the media, they all use fear. They use it to manipulate our emotions. They use it to influence our decisions. And they use it to make us more willing to accept restrictions on our freedom.
So fear is like a tool to justify policies that maybe we wouldn't normally agree with.
Exactly. It's a classic tactic. Create a sense of fear, then offer yourself as the solution, as the protector, the only one who can keep people safe.
So how do we combat this? Do we just need to be, braver?
It's not about being fearless, but about being discerning. Question the motives of the people who are trying to scare you. Look for arguments that are based on evidence, not emotional appeals. And remember that fear is often used to distract us from the real issues.
Yeah, don't let them control you with fear. But, this is starting to feel a bit overwhelming. Reading 1984, it's easy to start questioning everything, even our own choices.
That's a very valid feeling, and it leads us to another thought-provoking lesson. The illusion of free will under totalitarianism.
Yeah, the people in Oceania, they think they have choices. But their lives are so controlled, it's all just an illusion.
It is. It's lesson 7, and it really gets us thinking. How much of our decision-making is truly free? How much of it is influenced by, social conditioning, marketing, just the subtle pressures of conformity?
It's like we're all just puppets, dancing to someone else's tune. Yeah. So how do we break free?
It starts with awareness. Recognize those forces that might be, subtly influencing your choices. Question your assumptions. Be willing to step outside of your comfort zone. Be willing to challenge the status quo.
So it's about being more conscious.
Yeah.
More conscious of the choices that we make and why we're making them. But even if we become super aware of all this stuff, it seems like Orwell is saying that we're still, ultimately powerless against these forces.
There is definitely a sense of pessimism in 1984, but I think it's important to remember that Orwell wasn't trying to predict the future. He was trying to warn us about it. And by understanding how control works, we can become more equipped to resist it.
Yeah, like he's giving us a map of the dystopian landscape so we can avoid it.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really chilling aspect of 1984 that resonates with our world today. It's the deliberate destruction of human connection. Remember how the party encourages children to spy on their parents? They sow distrust among friends. They promote loyalty to the state above all else.
Yeah, that's lesson 8, the destruction of family and personal relationships. It's heartbreaking how these natural bonds, are twisted into tools of control.
It really highlights the danger of allowing any entity, whether it's a government or a corporation, to come between us and the people we love.
So are there parallels to this in our world?
Well, think about how social media can sometimes create a sense of isolation, or how political polarization can divide families and communities. Are we allowing technology and ideology to erode those bonds that connect us as humans?
Yeah, it's like we need to be more intentional about nurturing those relationships, building strong communities.
Absolutely. In a world that often feels very isolating, very fragmented, human connection is more important than ever.
Well, that was a bit of a downer. But before we spiral into despair, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll explore that final lesson from 1984. Hopefully, it'll be a little more uplifting. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into 1984. Before we pause there, we were talking about how the party in Oceana, how they really manipulate people, turning them against their own families, their friends. It's scary how relevant that feels even today, even in democracies.
It really is. It's like we're constantly being told who to trust, who to be afraid of, who to hate. But even in this really bleak dystopia, Orwell, he offers a glimmer of hope, right?
Yeah, he does. In fact, I think that's one of the most powerful takeaways from the book. Even with all this oppression, the human spirit, it still wants freedom. It's lesson 9, the inevitability of resistance, the desire for freedom.
Right. Winston's rebellion might have been tragic, but it's also really inspiring. It's like he's saying, okay, you can control my body, but you can't control my mind.
Exactly. Orwell is reminding us that the desire for freedom, it's part of human nature. You can suppress it, you can try to drive it underground, but you can't ever really get rid of it. Think about all the movements in history, the fight for civil rights, women's suffrage, LGBTQ plus equality. All these movements show how powerful the human spirit is, the power to resist oppression.
So what does that mean for us today? How can we channel our inner Winston and resist the forces that might be trying to control us? Do we all need to start a rebellion?
Maybe not a full-blown rebellion, but we can resist, in our everyday lives. It starts with awareness. Recognize the subtle ways that power works. Question the narratives that you're given. Don't be afraid to speak truth to power.
But what if speaking out gets us in trouble? There are real consequences for dissent, especially in some parts of the world.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm not saying go out and be reckless, but even when there might be consequences, there are still ways to resist. You can support organizations that are fighting for our freedoms. You can engage in peaceful protest. Even just having those difficult conversations with friends and family who might have different views, that can be resistance too.
So resistance can take many forms, from these big acts of defiance to these smaller, quieter acts of courage. So what else can we learn from Winston's story?
Well, I think it also highlights the importance of human connection. Remember how he found comfort and strength in his relationship with Julia? Even though, it was doomed from the start. In this world where everything is controlled, love and connection, those become acts of rebellion.
Yeah, it's like Orwell is saying that even when things are really dark, we have to hold on to those human connections. They give our lives meaning and purpose. But that's hard. When you're constantly being told who to trust, who to be afraid of.
That's right. And that's why it's so important to nurture our relationships, to build strong communities, and to resist anything that tries to divide us.
It sounds like resisting all of that, it takes a lot of courage and critical thinking and compassion.
Absolutely. And a good amount of skepticism, too. Don't forget, the party in 1984, they thrive on our ignorance. They thrive on our complacency.
So it's up to us to stay informed, to question everything, and to never give up that fight for a better world, even if it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle.
Exactly, and to never lose hope. Because as Winston wrote, if there is hope, it lies in the proles.
Whoa, that's interesting. So even in this really controlled world, there's always a chance that resistance could come from like the most unexpected places. Are you saying we should all just like sit back and wait for the proles to save us?
No, not quite. But it does remind us that power is never absolute. There are always cracks, and those cracks, they can become openings for change.
So it's not about waiting for a revolution. It's about creating those openings through our actions, our words, and just being willing to challenge things.
Precisely. And it's about knowing that even these small acts of resistance, they can make a difference. They can inspire others.
It's a good thing Winston didn't have social media, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine how many times he would have been canceled?
Yeah, he was definitely a product of his time. It's interesting to think about how technology changes, how we even think about rebellion. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive into 1984. 9 really powerful lessons, and they feel so relevant to our lives today. From the dangers of totalitarianism and how truth can be manipulated to how important individual freedom is and the power of resistance.
It's been a journey. We've talked about some heavy stuff. But I think we've also learned some really valuable things about how to navigate this world.
I think so, too. And hopefully we've inspired you to think critically, to think about the forces that might be trying to shape your thoughts, your behaviors, even your reality.
So, to our listeners out there, what are your takeaways? What lessons really stuck with you? And what are you going to do to resist those forces in your own lives? We'd love to hear from you.
And we'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. For the last part of our exploration of 1984, we've been through, well, a lot. Totalitarianism, surveillance, even thought control.
We also talked about how important freedom is, thinking for ourselves and those human connections that help us resist these forces.
Right. But before we finish up, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. The idea that even when it feels like everything's controlled, there are still cracks in the system. Remember that quote from Winston? If there is hope, it lies in the proles.
Yeah, it's a really powerful quote. It suggests that power, it's never really absolute. Resistance can come from anywhere. Throughout history, think about it, social change, it's often come from the people who are marginalized, the people who were considered powerless.
So it's not about just waiting for some hero to come and save us.
Yeah.
It's about realizing we all have to be part of shaping a better future. But what does it actually look like? How do we go from just knowing about this stuff to actually doing something?
Well, we can support organizations that are fighting for the things we believe in. There are so many ways to get involved and make a difference, whether it's human rights, the environment, social justice.
Right. And it's not just about, giving money or signing petitions. It's about being active in our communities, having tough conversations, challenging the status quo.
Exactly. We need to be informed, engaged citizens, holding those in power accountable, and never forget that we're not powerless. Even small acts of resistance, they can have a big impact. Inspire others.
It's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly. But it's also important to remember that resistance doesn't always have to be this big dramatic thing. Sometimes it's about the everyday choices we make, the books we read, the conversations we have, the way we treat each other. All of that shapes the world around us.
So it's not just about fighting against something. It's about creating, the kind of world we actually want to live in.
Right. And remembering that even when things are dark, there's always hope. Winston, he might have been crushed in the end. But his story, it shows us that humans, we want freedom. And that fight for a better future, it never really ends.
So to all our listeners out there, keep questioning, keep challenging, keep connecting, and never stop believing that there's hope.
And remember, like Orwell wrote, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into 1984. We hope you've learned something and that you're feeling, maybe a little more ready to take on the world.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay free.
And keep those deep dives going. We'll be back soon with another journey into the heart of knowledge.